Hello everyone, I'm Corey and we're talking manpower. Today, I've got a very special guest. I've got Mr. Jim Davis. He's the Chief of the Manpower and Management Division here at U.S. Army Europe in Weisbaden, Germany. Mr. Davis, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.
Of course.
So what is your role as the Chief of Manpower and Management here at USAR?
I have a couple of roles. The first one, as you said, we're the Manpower and Management Division of USAR. So from a headquarters perspective, I do manpower management, just pretty much like everybody else does it for the headquarters civilians. But then I have the management division piece of it that adds the resource management flavor, working for the director of resource management. That makes sense. We do MICP, we do cost management, we do cost benefit analysis, we do the manpower studies for the entire command. And then we also do the programming and allocation for the entire command as well for the civilian resources. Working very closely with FMD, we also have a shared responsibility with submitting the TDA manpower requirements and the POM for military as well.
So you just talked a little bit about what you're responsible for and whatnot. So I understand that this organization, your branch, is the only studies capability in the command, I understand. And why is it important for the command to have that capability, and what's it like for you to be the only one here that does that?
Right. So we are the only studies capability, albeit a small studies capability for the command. And it keeps our requirements validation, our requirements prioritizing on track, having a theater level emphasis as well. Without that capacity, we would have to rely on USMA to come over, adds the cost, doesn't add the flavor of the theater. It requires us to coordinate extremely close with our FMD counterparts at our two subordinate commands, the 7th Air Army Training Command and the 21st Theater Sustainment Command.
So explain to me, why is it important to do manpower here and here in Europe per se? Why is it a necessity thing? Why can't we just do it all at headquarters?
Right. So in Europe that many folks knew when I came in the late 70s, early 80s, Europe consisted of England, Italy, and West Germany. Europe now consists of everything from the Baltics to the Black Sea and all of the countries in between. Without really being here, without seeing it and experiencing it, you don't get the same sense that when you're doing manpower requirements validation for moving ammunition to an exercise. It's one thing to move it 400 miles and you go from Texas to Oklahoma. Of course, you got safety things, DOT, those kinds of things. Here, when you do that and you move it 400 miles, you move across 4 international borders. So the complexity of the mission in Europe is such that you really have to have on the ground situational knowledge of all the intricacies involved. Not only are you moving it across the international borders, but often the exercises are bilateral or multinational or even coalition type exercises at the same time. All of that lends itself to a perspective that you would not get sitting in Washington, D.C. or Fort Bliss or Fort Bragg.
So that leads me a little bit to another question. Let's say we're transporting ammunition across international borders. How difficult is it to deal with the different cultures and the different languages? Because obviously we're speaking English, but we're in Germany, they speak German, and you're moving to Poland and they're speaking Polish. And how is that difficult? Is that difficult to navigate? And then how do you kind of get around that, and who do you kind of lean on? Do you have people in your shop that can kind of do that kind of thing?
Sure. So to answer some of that, is English is one of the primary languages of the EU. So the majority, 90+%, speak English either as a first or a second language. So language barrier is not usually the problem. Usually it's going to be cultural or nationalistic. in the fact that when you're going from Estonia to Latvia, you need to recognize that that is a unique country. But internal to my office, that's more on the operational side. Internal to my office, we've run into challenges because we have local national employees with very different work rules than U.S. employees have. So when you're talking about a German employee, we have to follow host nation labor practices, which is far different. It takes 650 days to execute a RIF of a German national employee, where it takes under 180 days for a U.S. employee. But there are different notification protocols that go with that, etc. And then you talk about Italy, it's a totally different setup. And you go to Romania, where we don't have a host nation program right now, but we're trying to establish one. And then even to further make that complex, it depends on really who's going to be the lead service in that command as well. So we're the lead command, the Army, for Germany. So the Air Force and the Navy with German employees have to follow our negotiated tariff agreements, which is really a labor union agreement.
When you're doing these different types of missions, how much coordination among the different installations, here in Stuttgart and wherever else, and as well as other organizations in Germany, how much coordination do you have to do between each of them when you're doing these manpower documents?
From an Army perspective, being the ASCC, anything that is within our purview, our command structure, we do negotiate with, or we coordinate with our two major subordinate commands, one at Kaiserslautern and then one at Grafenwehr. But from the perspective of coordinating manpower documents with either MCOM Europe or NetCom elements here or MI, my office doesn't have that responsibility. That really goes to the G3 Force Management Division, and they're acting in the interest of our commanding general, who is the senior Army person in Germany for all things U.S. Army.
So what are some of the unique challenges and some of the unique benefits to being and working here in Germany?
So I've talked about some of those already. Just the vast array of mission and how fast the mission is evolving here. With the ERI, the European Reassurance Initiative, our workload has increased fivefold at least over the past couple of years. From a national strategy perspective, we were working on the pivot to the Pacific when I got here. As I'm leaving, now we're talking about European Reassurance Initiative and how are we rebuilding the U.S. presence in Europe, and what are the op-tempo things that we're going to do. So being on the ground here and seeing these things evolve, our CG likes to talk about empowering junior leaders and developing the leaders of tomorrow, and how Europe is really a leadership battleground or a workspace to evolve those leaders. The same thing goes true on the civilian side, and it's very interesting to sit and watch how U.S. Army Europe has evolved over the past 3 years, from being a small ASCC to now one with no intermediate corps division, nothing in between us and the tactical units, how we execute a very complex mission in a complex environment.
So what's the biggest thing that you personally have learned professionally while you've been here?
How the Army does manpower. I've been in manpower since 1982, roughly about 30 years, 28 years in the Air Force. I did a 3-year tour at DFAS, and then I also did my 3.5 years here. The Army does manpower different than DFAS, which does it different than the Air Force. There's good and bad. What I take back to the Air Force from my time in the Army is that we can learn some things from the Army, and the Army can learn some things from us, and how do we do merge the two well. The one process that I find really encompassing and it really makes a lot of sense to me is TAA. That all of the combat elements, all of the warfighting capability is done in a synchronized manner, and it's standardized across the entire footprint at one time, so that a decision can be made on the total warfighting capability. In the Air Force, it's a little bit more fractionalized. It's a little bit more in its own battle rhythm and not done as an overall picture. So I take that back.
So why do you think someone should come over here at USERA to work, and what will they see, and how can they best prepare for that opportunity?
They will see everything that TRADOC is developing and teaching. They will see everything that FORSCOM is preparing and training for. They will see that in an actual real-time operating environment. So from a professional standpoint, it's highly rewarding, and you see a more direct contribution to the mission. The closer you get to what you're trying to achieve, you see a more direct tie. Personally, Europe is a great place for travel. The things that you can do here are once-in-a-lifetime bucket experiences for a lot of folks. And being in Weisbaden, we're kind of in the footprint or in the middle of Europe. You know, it's 5 hours to Paris, it's 5 hours to Amsterdam, it's 8 hours to Italy, 8 hours to Berlin. You can get to Poland in a day. All of those things are here, and it's available to anybody that wants to take the time to venture out.
So what would you say the biggest thing they could do to prepare for the opportunity would be?
Have an open mind. Take the tour and what you want to get out of it, and set those expectations up front. You're not going to be in with all of the conveniences that you have in Washington, D.C. or Texas. It's not America that you're coming to. You're coming to, in my town, we have buildings that are 1,000 years old, and I can look out my window and see those buildings, and having an appreciation that you will leave some of the American comforts behind, but you're coming to a place that offers history as well as that modern flavor. Frankfurt is the Wall Street of Europe, and it's 20 minutes away. But so is a Roman city that dates from 700 AD, and they're 20 minutes away from you either way. So it's accepting that you're not going to a stateside assignment, be willing to get something both personally and professionally out of that assignment. I think that sets you up for success.
Well, Mr. Davis, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I know you're very busy and you've got a lot going on here, so thank you very much, and I really appreciate it. Well, everyone, that's all we have time for today. We look forward to our next segment, and thank you very much for listening. And until next time, have a great Army Day.